Imagine coming home to find an eviction notice on your dream vacation house, only to discover that the papers were forged by the last people you'd ever suspect. What drove my parents to betray me like this? Watch the shocking story unfold and find out how family secrets, fear, and love all collide in this jaw-dropping tale. It was a bright Saturday morning when I first noticed the eviction notice on the front door of my vacation house. I had just returned from a quick weekend getaway, eager to relax in the comfort of my second home. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something strange. There was a piece of paper on the door, fluttering slightly in the breeze. My first thought was that it was some kind of flyer or advertising material, but as I drew closer, I saw the unmistakable bold letters, "Eviction Notice." I froze. The wind seemed to stop around me, and for a moment, the entire world felt like it had slowed down. This house was supposed to be my safe haven, a retreat from the pressures of everyday life. It had been a dream come true when I had first bought it. And now, here it was, being ripped away from me without any prior warning. I had been meticulous about everything related to this house: payments, maintenance, everything. The thought of being evicted never even crossed my mind. I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my chest, and carefully removed the notice from the door. My fingers trembled slightly as I unfolded it. Scanning the contents, the document was formal, official-looking, and signed by what seemed to be a legal authority. It stated that I was being evicted from my own property due to some unpaid dues and violations of the property agreement. The date of the eviction was set for the very next week. It seemed so final, so irreversible. How could this be happening? There had been no warning, no communication, nothing to suggest any issues with the house. My mind raced as I tried to process the information. I was sure I had kept up with all the payments. The mortgage, the insurance, the utilities, all were current. There was no way I could have missed something as important as an eviction notice. I ran through every detail in my head, but everything checked out. Still, there it was, a legal document claiming otherwise. It didn't make sense. I quickly reached for my phone and dialed the number listed on the notice. After what felt like an eternity, I finally reached someone from the management company responsible for the property. The person on the other end was polite but curt, confirming that, indeed, the eviction was legitimate. They mentioned something about violations of terms, but the explanation was vague and unhelpful. I insisted that I had no knowledge of any such violations, and they promised to send me more details in the coming days. But that wasn't enough. The more I thought about it, the more I felt like something was off. This didn't seem like a simple mistake. There had to be more to this than met the eye. As I stood on the doorstep, staring at the notice in my hands, a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't let this happen, not without understanding why it was happening in the first place. I decided to go inside and look through my records. I pulled out all the paperwork related to the property mortgage statements, payment receipts, correspondence with the management company, and started going through everything with a fine-tooth comb. But as I reviewed the documents, the same question kept echoing in my mind. Why had this eviction been filed? What was going on? The more I investigated, the more confused and frustrated I became. Every paper, every receipt, every bill, and every email seemed to confirm that I was up to date on everything. Yet, somehow, this eviction notice still stood. There was no explanation, no reason, just an overwhelming feeling of uncertainty. Something was definitely wrong. In that moment, I knew I had to get to the bottom of it. This wasn't just a mistake, it was something much bigger. Something I wasn't yet seeing. But what could it be? Was I being targeted? Or was there something more sinister at play? I didn't have answers yet, but I knew I had to dig deeper. My vacation home, my sanctuary, was on the line, and I wasn't about to lose it without a fight. The following day, I woke up with a restless sense of urgency. The eviction notice still lingered in my mind, occupying every thought. It was as though a cloud of doubt and suspicion had settled over my life. I knew something wasn't right, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that something about the entire situation felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than just a simple eviction issue. I decided to take a different approach. I called a friend who worked in real estate law, hoping for some clarity. She was as shocked as I was, but her first instinct was to check if the papers were real or potentially forged. She suggested that I have the document analyzed by a legal expert to ensure its authenticity. I thanked her and immediately reached out to a lawyer, scheduling an appointment for later that afternoon. As I walked through the house, a sense of dread began to set in. The familiar walls, the comfortable furniture, the view from the windows, all of it suddenly felt foreign. The place that had always been my refuge now seemed like a house of cards, precariously balanced on the edge of collapse. My mind wandered back to the day I had first purchased the house. It had been a dream come true, a place where I could escape to recharge, away from the constant noise and pressures of daily life. But now, it felt as though that dream was being taken away from me for reasons I couldn't comprehend. I spent the next few hours obsessively reviewing every email, every contract, every piece of communication I had ever had with the property management company. I tried to recall any conversation or document that could have hinted at any issues with the property, but nothing came to mind. It was as though I was being blindsided by something I couldn't even identify. The appointment with the lawyer came and went, but the outcome wasn't what I had hoped for. He confirmed that the eviction notice was, indeed, an official legal document. The signatures and seals matched up with what he could verify in the system. However, he also pointed out a few inconsistencies. The way the notice was phrased, the way certain clauses were worded, it didn't quite match the standard procedure for an eviction in this area. His advice was clear. There was a chance the document had been forged, or at the very least manipulated. But who would do such a thing? And why? The idea that someone would go to the trouble of forging an eviction notice seemed almost too far-fetched. Yet the more I thought about it, the more plausible it became. I had to face the reality that someone, likely close to me, was involved in this somehow. My parents had always been supportive, but in the past few months, there had been subtle shifts in our relationship. Small disagreements here and there, a sense of growing distance. But this felt like something much more significant. Could they be behind this? I couldn't believe it, but the thought kept creeping into my mind. I decided to confront them. It wasn't something I was looking forward to, but I couldn't ignore the possibility any longer. The evening passed slowly as I worked up the courage to make the call. When I finally reached my parents, I tried to remain calm. I explained the situation and asked if they knew anything about the eviction notice. My father, usually the calm and collected one, was unusually quiet. My mother, on the other hand, tried to brush it off, claiming it must have been a mistake. But something in their responses didn't sit right with me. The hesitation in their voices, the way they deflected my questions, it all felt wrong. I ended the call feeling more confused than ever. It was clear they were hiding something. But what? I couldn't understand why they would have any reason to forge an eviction notice against me. But there it was, a wall of silence, a lack of transparency. The thought of them being involved in this was crushing. They were my parents, the people I trusted most in the world. And yet, the more I thought about it, the more I realized that their actions might be linked to something larger, something hidden beneath the surface. It was a revelation that I wasn't ready for, but it was also the only explanation that made any sense. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept racing, replaying the conversation over and over again. The more I thought about it, the more it seemed like my parents had something to do with this. But why? What was their motivation? I had to find out, and I had to do it quickly. Time was running out, and the pressure was mounting. The truth had to be uncovered, no matter how painful it might be. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The revelation that my parents might be involved in the forged eviction notice was almost too much to bear. I had always seen them as the pillars of my life, the people who had been there for me through thick and thin. The idea that they could be hiding something from me, especially something as drastic as this, was both shocking and heartbreaking. I spent the next few days reflecting on our relationship, looking back at every conversation and interaction for any clues that could explain their behavior. It didn't take long for me to realize that there had been subtle shifts in our dynamic over the past year. Nothing overt or obvious, but small changes in how they treated me. My father had become more distant, often preoccupied with his own business or personal matters. He used to be the first person to offer advice or support. But lately, he seemed indifferent to my concerns. My mother, too, had grown colder. There were moments when she would brush off my accomplishments or dismiss my struggles with a kind of indifference I hadn't seen before. I brushed these things off at first, convincing myself that they were just the normal ups and downs of life. But now, with everything that had happened, I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. I started to wonder if this growing distance was a sign of something deeper, a rift that had been developing under the surface. Had there been something about my success, my vacation house, or even my life choices that had upset them? At first, I couldn't see how anything I had done could have caused such a dramatic response. I had always been independent, but I had never felt that I was putting a wedge between us. However, in light of the eviction notice, I couldn't help but question everything. Could their growing indifference be a mask for something else? Something they didn't want to tell me. I began asking myself why they would go to such lengths. My parents were not financially struggling, at least. As far as I knew, they had always been comfortable, even if not extraordinarily wealthy. Their actions didn't seem to align with any financial desperation. But then, I started to think about the nature of family dynamics. Maybe this was about more than just money. Perhaps it was about control, resentment, or even jealousy. The more I thought about it, the more it seemed like my success, especially the vacation house, might have triggered something deeper within them. My father had always been the one who valued hard work and sacrifice, and he had worked tirelessly to provide for our family. Perhaps he felt that I had somehow bypassed that struggle, that I had achieved something without experiencing the same hardships he had endured. My mother, too, had always been very protective, sometimes overbearing in her care. She might have felt that I was becoming too independent, too distant from her. In their eyes, perhaps my success represented a kind of departure from the life they had envisioned for me, a life where I remained close to them, constantly needing their support and approval. I decided to confront them directly. I couldn't keep living in this state of uncertainty. So I called them to meet at the vacation house. When they arrived, the tension was palpable. I didn't know how to begin, but I knew that I couldn't back down. I told them about the eviction notice and asked if they had anything to do with it. The room fell silent as I watched their faces. My mother avoided eye contact, while my father's expression was unreadable. I repeated my question, urging them to tell me the truth. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, my mother spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "We didn't mean for things to go this far," she said, her words shaky. "It wasn't supposed to end like this." I could feel my heart racing as I processed her words. My father, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "We were trying to protect you," he said, his voice strained. "You've been so focused on this house, on your success. We were afraid you were losing sight of what really mattered. We didn't know how else to get through to you." It was then that I understood. The eviction was not about the house at all. It was about me, about my independence, my growing distance from them, and their fear of being left behind. They had orchestrated the entire thing in a misguided attempt to wake me up, to bring me back into their orbit. But instead of protecting me, they had hurt me deeply. I was torn between anger and sadness. I couldn't believe they had gone to such extreme lengths. But at the same time, I understood their fear. They had seen me evolve in ways they hadn't anticipated, and it had triggered something in them. Their actions, though misguided, were born from love, even if it was a love that was now tinged with control and fear. The conversation didn't end with immediate resolution. There were tears, apologies, and moments of raw honesty, but it became clear that there was a lot of healing to be done, not just in terms of the eviction, but in terms of the relationship itself. We had all been operating from a place of fear and misunderstanding, and it was going to take time to rebuild the trust that had been broken. As I sat there, processing everything they had said, I realized that the eviction notice was just the tip of the iceberg. The real work, understanding my parents, their motivations, and how to move forward, was only just beginning. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was determined to find a way to navigate the complicated web of emotions, motivations, and relationships that had led to this point. This was no longer just about a house, it was about family, trust, and the fragile nature of human connections. As I sat in the quiet of my vacation house, the truth began to dawn on me. My parents' actions, though shocking and painful, were part of a much larger picture. They had orchestrated the forged eviction not as a simple act of malice, but as a desperate attempt to get my attention, to make me see what they had been struggling with. As I reflected on their words and their actions, I realized that the eviction was just a symptom of something deeper, something I had failed to see in the years leading up to this moment. The more I thought about it, the more I understood that my parents' feelings of resentment and fear had been building up for a long time. It wasn't just about the vacation house. It wasn't just about me becoming more independent or successful. It was about their own unresolved emotions, about feeling disconnected from the person I had become. They were afraid of losing me, afraid that my accomplishments and my growing autonomy meant that I no longer needed them in the way I once had. I had always been close to my parents, but over the years, I had slowly carved out a space for myself. I had moved away, pursued my own interests, and built a life that was separate from theirs. While I thought of this as normal and healthy independence, my parents viewed it as a departure from the family unit, a sign that I was slipping away from them. They had watched me succeed and grow, but instead of feeling proud, they felt increasingly isolated. It was this isolation, this fear of being left behind, that had pushed them to take such extreme measures. In their minds, the forged eviction notice was a way to jolt me back to reality, to force me to confront the fact that I had become too independent, too distant. They didn't know how to express their feelings in any other way, so they resorted to manipulation. It wasn't just a financial issue or a property dispute, it was a cry for help, a way for them to get my attention, to make me realize that they were struggling with the changes in our relationship. They wanted me to see that they still mattered to me, that they still had a place in my life. As I began to piece together the reasons behind their actions, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of sadness. My parents had always been the ones I turned to for guidance, and yet here they were, lost in their own feelings of abandonment and fear. They had tried to take control of the situation, to impose their own version of reality, without understanding how damaging it would be to me. They didn't realize that, in their attempt to bring me back, they had pushed me further away. But at the same time, I began to understand them better. I could see the underlying love that had motivated their actions, even if it was misguided. It wasn't that they didn't want me to succeed. They just didn't know how to deal with the fact that I was no longer the person I once was. They were struggling with their own sense of identity, trying to come to terms with the fact that I had grown up and become my own person. This wasn't just about me moving on. It was about them facing the reality that I would never be the same child they had raised. It was clear to me now that the eviction was a desperate attempt to reconnect with me, but in their eyes, it was also a way to protect me, to prevent me from losing sight of the values and priorities that they held dear. They had always been protective, perhaps too protective, but in their minds, they were only looking out for my best interests. They had forgotten, however, that I had my own path to follow, my own way of learning and growing. They had tried to impose their own fears and insecurities onto me, but they didn't realize that their approach was only driving a wedge between us. I knew that I had to confront them about the true nature of their actions. I couldn't allow them to continue down this path, thinking that they could control my life in this way. But at the same time, I also had to find a way to forgive them. I understood now that their actions were rooted in love, But love had become distorted by fear and misunderstanding. If I wanted to rebuild our relationship, I needed to address both the pain and the love that had led to this point. The journey ahead was not going to be easy. There were deep emotional wounds on both sides that needed to be healed. But I knew that, if I wanted to move forward, I had to be willing to confront the truth and to forgive. My parents needed to understand that their actions, no matter how well-intentioned, had hurt me, but I also needed to recognize that they were coming from a place of fear of losing their connection with me, fear of not being needed anymore. As I prepared to have another difficult conversation with them, I realized that this situation was not just about the eviction or the forged papers. It was about reclaiming our relationship, understanding each other's pain, and finding a way to move forward together. I couldn't change the past, but I could shape the future. And for the sake of my family, I was willing to try. The aftermath of the confrontation with my parents was filled with a strange mixture of emotions: relief, confusion, and a deep sense of sadness. The realization that the eviction notice had been a misguided attempt to protect me, to reconnect with me, was both a bitter pill to swallow and an unexpected insight into the complexities of family relationships. But the most significant realization was that the damage had been done, and now it was time to figure out how to repair it. The first step was understanding that things couldn't just go back to normal. I had always thought that family, especially parents, were constants in my life, but this situation had shattered that illusion. The trust that had been so central to our relationship had been broken, and rebuilding it wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't just about the forged eviction notice, it was about the deeper issues at play. My parents had tried to control my life out of fear, but in doing so, they had created a rift that would take time to heal. I started by taking a step back to reflect on the bigger picture. Yes, I had been hurt by their actions, but I also realized that they had acted out of a sense of loss. They hadn't been able to express their feelings to me directly, and instead of talking about their fears, they had resorted to manipulation. Their actions had come from a place of vulnerability, not malice. Understanding this helped me find a place of compassion. Even though the hurt was still fresh, I knew that forgiveness was essential, not just for my parents, but for myself as well. Holding on to anger or resentment would only continue to poison our relationship. But forgiveness wasn't something I could just grant without taking the time to process everything. I needed to be honest with myself about how their actions had impacted me, how the sense of betrayal had shaken my sense of security, not just in my parents, but in my understanding of trust itself. Over the next few weeks, I continued to reach out to my parents, but each conversation was fraught with emotion. It wasn't about simply fixing the situation, it was about rebuilding something that had been fractured. I spent hours talking with them, trying to understand where they were coming from, and allowing them the space to express their own regrets. They apologized for their actions, for not trusting me enough to communicate openly, and for trying to control my choices. But their apologies didn't erase the damage done. What mattered now was how we moved forward. One of the most difficult parts of the process was accepting that things wouldn't be the same. The vacation house, which had once symbolized safety and peace, now held painful memories of deceit and manipulation. The place I had once escaped to was now tied to the feelings of betrayal that had emerged during the eviction drama. I had to decide whether to keep the house, or let it go, whether the memories of what had happened would always overshadow the memories of the good times I had spent there. It took some time, but eventually, I realized that keeping the house wasn't about the physical property. It was about reclaiming my sense of autonomy and moving forward. I couldn't let the past dictate my future. I spoke to my lawyer about the eviction, had the forged papers nullified, and began the process of regaining full control over the property. But I also knew that I needed to let go of the emotional weight that came with it. The house had been a symbol of independence, but it had also become a symbol of the betrayal I had experienced. Letting go of that emotional baggage was just as important as regaining the property. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding my relationship with my parents, but on my own terms. We had to relearn how to communicate, how to trust each other again. I learned to set boundaries, to express my feelings without fear of judgment, and to allow them to do the same. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of tension and misunderstanding, but there were also moments of growth and healing. The process of healing wasn't linear. Some days, I felt like we were making progress, and other days, it felt like we were back to square one. But the most important thing was that we were trying. We were working through the pain, through the fear, and through the damage. Slowly, the house no longer represented betrayal. It began to represent resilience, strength, and the ability to overcome even the most difficult challenges. By the time I finally felt at peace with the situation, I had come to understand that family wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about avoiding mistakes or never feeling hurt. It was about understanding each other's flaws, forgiving each other, and finding a way to move forward together. My parents had made a grave mistake, but they had also shown remorse, and I had learned to forgive them. In the end, it wasn't about the forged papers or the eviction notice. It was about love, trust, and the willingness to heal. As I looked back on everything, I realized that the eviction notice had forced me to confront the complexities of family and identity. It had pushed me to reevaluate my relationship with my parents and to redefine what it meant to be independent. And while the process of healing had been painful, it had also been transformative. It had taught me that sometimes the greatest challenges in life lead to the most profound growth. If you found this story surprising, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You want to miss the rest of the journey as we dive into more unexpected twists, family drama, and life lessons. Join the community and stay tuned for more.